European history. The Warsaw Pact, 1955–1917. The Warsaw Pact, 1955–1917. The Warsaw Pact was a political and military alliance of the communist states in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. It was established on 14th May 1955, during the Cold War, with its headquarters and command in Moscow. It was born out of a treaty that was signed in Warsaw, Poland, and it was officially called the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation and Mutual Assistance, with their motto, Union of Peace and Socialism. The original member states included the Soviet Union, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania and Albania. Events that led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact. The formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955 was prompted by the prevailing events, which included the following. World War II of 1939–1945 led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. Following World War II, the Soviet Union had concluded bilateral treaties with several Eastern European states. These treaties promoted friendship between the Eastern European states that were communist and the Soviet Union, which eventually led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact by 1955. The 1946 Iron Curtain speech made by Winston Churchill led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. In March 1946, the former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill visited USA, where delivered what came to be known as the Iron Curtain speech, in which he condemned the policies of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe. He stated that an Iron Curtain had descended across Europe, from Stettin in the Baltic Sea in the north to Trieste in the Adriatic Sea in the south. By this he meant the efforts by the Soviet Union to block itself and its satellite states from open contact with the Western powers. He therefore called for an alliance between Britain and USA against the Soviet Union, which he accused of establishing an Iron Curtain across Europe. This speech annoyed the Soviet Union, hence prompting her to establish the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The Truman Doctrine of 1947 also led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The Truman Doctrine was an American foreign policy whose purpose was to counter or contain the Soviet geographical expansion during the Cold War. This policy was put in place in March 1947 by President Harry Truman, who became the USA president after the death of Franklin Roosevelt, wartime president. Through this policy, America gave financial support to the Greek and Turkish governments against communist movements or threats in Greece and Turkey, so as to prevent these two states in Eastern Europe from falling under the Soviet sphere of influence. Truman further pledged American support for other nations that were threatened by the Soviet communism. This doctrine threatened the Soviet Union, thus prompting her to form the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The Marshall Aid Plan of 1947 also led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The Marshall Aid Plan, also known as the European Recovery Program, was a United States program providing economic aid to Western Europe following the destruction of World War II. It was initiated by the American Secretary of State George Marshall in June 1947, and it was intended to halt or block the spread of communism on the European continent. It was believed by USA that those Western European nations that benefited from this American economic aid would reject communism and instead ally with the USA. This threatened the Soviet Union, thus prompting her to form the Warsaw Pact in 1955. European history. The Warsaw Pact, 1955–1917. Reaction to the Marshall Aid Plan of 1947, and therefore it symbolized the Soviet Union's refusal to accept economic aid from the Marshall Aid Plan or allow any of her satellite states in Eastern Europe to do so. This was because of their belief that the Marshall Aid Plan was an attempt to weaken the Soviet influence in her satellite states by making the beneficiary countries to depend on the United States of America. Through the system, the Soviet Union even encouraged and sponsored the economic integration of the communist states in Eastern Europe and elsewhere in the world, which later led to the formation of an economic organization known as the COMEC and the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance in 1949. This promoted cooperation between the Soviet Union and the communist states in Eastern Europe, which later led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The formation of the Cominform, the Communist Information Bureau, in 1947 was another event that led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. This was an information bureau or office that was set up by the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin on 5th August 1947. It was an organization set up to represent communist parties all across Europe and bring them under the direction of the Soviet Union. It therefore promoted cooperation between the communist states in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and this eventually gave birth to the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The Berlin blockade of 1948-1949 also led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact. The Berlin blockade was an attempt in 1948-1949 by the Soviet Union to limit the ability of France, Great Britain and the United States to travel by railway, road and canal to the sectors of Berlin, the capital city of Germany, which lay within the Russian-occupied East Germany. This was aimed at forcing the Western powers out of Berlin, the German capital. The Western powers responded to the blockade by organizing the Berlin airlifts of June 1948-1949 to carry supplies to the people of West Berlin, which was a difficult task given the big size of the city's population. The Soviet Union did not disrupt the airlift for fear that this might lead to open conflict. She instead decided to lift the blockade of West Berlin on 12 May 1949. This incident increased the enmity between the Soviet Union and the Western powers, which prompted the Soviet Union to form the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO in 1949 led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact. When USA and other Western nations formed NATO in 1949, the Soviet Union and its affiliated communist nations in Eastern Europe decided to establish a rival or counter-alliance known as the Warsaw Pact in 1955. Through this alliance, the member states promised to defend any member that may be attacked by an outside force. The Warsaw Pact was therefore formed as a defensive alliance against the threats from the NATO powers. The success of the Communist Revolution of 1949 in China also led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. This revolution involved the defeat of the nationalist government in China under Chiang Kai-shek, which was supported by America. The government was defeated by the communists under the leadership of Mao Zedong, who was supported by the Soviet Union, and he established a government he called the People's Communist Republic of China on 1st October 1949. The nationalists who had been defeated fled to the neighboring island of Taiwan, where they established the government and regarded themselves as the true Chinese, and were even recognized by the United States as well as the United Nations Organization. The success of this revolution worsened the already fragile relations between the United States and the Soviet Union. This therefore prompted European history, the Warsaw Pact, 1955-1917, by an American Army general known as Dwight David Eisenhower. The formation of this joint force threatened the Soviet Union, thus prompting her to establish the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The Korean Crisis, or War of 1950-1953, was another event that led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact. This was a war between North Korea with the support of China and the Soviet Union, and South Korea with the support of the United States. It broke out on 25 June 1950 when Communist North Korea invaded South Korea, which was capitalist. This invasion was the first military action of the Cold War. Although the Korean War finally came to an end in July 1953, it increased the enmity between the Soviet Union and the United States. This therefore prompted the Soviet Union to establish a defensive military alliance known as the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The formation of the European Coal and Steel Community (EXC) in 1951 was another event. This was an organization of 6 European countries created after World War I to regulate their industrial production through a centralized authority. It was formally established on 18 April 1951 by the Treaty of Paris, signed by Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg plus France, West Germany and Italy as the members. This treaty officially came into force on 23 July 1952. The EXC was the first international organization to bring about formal integration in Western Europe, which strengthened the region. This threatened the Soviet Union, which prompted her to establish the Warsaw Pact in 1955 with several Eastern European states. The entry of Greece and Turkey into NATO led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact. Greece and Turkey were located in Eastern Europe near the Soviet or Russian influence. In April 1952, the Western powers agreed to admit Greece and Turkey to NATO so as to prevent the other two states from falling under the Soviet sphere of influence. This therefore led to the expansion of NATO strategic frontiers or boundaries, which troubled the Soviet leaders so much as it was a threat to the spread of communism in Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union therefore responded to this threat by founding the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The death of Joseph Stalin in 1953 led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact. In March 1953, Joseph Stalin, who had ruled the Soviet Union since 1928, died at the age of 73 years and was replaced by Nikita Khrushchev. As a new leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev wanted to project his influence on the international scene and challenge the American dominance, especially in Europe. He therefore influenced the Soviet Union join the other communist states in Eastern Europe so as to form the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The 1953 East German uprisings led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. These uprisings broke out in June 1953 after the communist authorities in East Germany attempted to increase working hours without raising wages. They began on 16 June 1953 when strikes and riots broke out in East Berlin and other cities, which eventually turned into a widespread uprising against the communist German democratic government that was supported by the Soviet Union. These anti-communist uprisings therefore threatened the survival of communism in Eastern Europe, which prompted the Soviet Union to establish the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The formation of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization (SEATO) in 1954 was another event that led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. In September 1954, the United States, France, Great Britain, New Zealand, Australia, the Philippines, Thailand and Pakistan formed the Southeast European History, the Warsaw Pact, 1955-1917. The formation of the Western European Union in October 1954 led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. This was the international organization and military alliance that succeeded the Western Union that had been set up in 1948 immediately after World War II. This organization was capitalist and therefore its member states were also allies of the Western Bloc led by the United States during the Cold War through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization (NATO). This threatened the Soviet Union, hence prompting her to set up the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The entry of West Germany into NATO in May 1955 was another event that led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact. When the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, entered NATO in early May 1955, the Soviet Union feared a very powerful NATO and a rearmed West Germany. This was because NATO allowed West Germany to start a small army again, which annoyed the Soviet leaders, especially with World War II still fresh in their minds. They therefore decided to put security measures in place in the shape of a political and military alliance known as the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The Baghdad Pact in 1955 also led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact. This was a defensive military organization founded in 1955 by Iran, Iraq, Pakistan and Great Britain. The main purpose of this organization was to prevent the spread of communism and foster peace in the Middle East. This organization was anti-communist and strongly linked to the NATO, which therefore threatened the Soviet Union. This therefore prompted her to establish the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The spread of communism into Eastern Europe led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. Between 1945 and 1955, the Soviet Union spread communism to several Eastern European states, like Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria and Albania. In such countries, the Soviet Union set up local communist political parties that were intended to promote communism and destroy capitalism. This therefore brought the Soviet Union closer to these Eastern European states, and in 1955, these states accepted to join the Soviet Union so as to establish the Warsaw Pact. Achievements of the Warsaw Pact, 1955-1917. The Warsaw Pact was a military alliance established in 1955 between the Soviet Union and numerous Eastern Bloc states like Poland, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Romania and Albania. The major aims or objectives of the Warsaw Pact of 1955 were to counter the spread of capitalism, promote economic cooperation among the communist states, as well as to spread communism among others. It scored the several achievements between 1955 and 1970 as noted below. It reduced and in some cases eliminated capitalist tendencies, especially in Eastern Europe. It strengthened economic cooperation in the region among the communist countries. This cooperation had begun with the formation of an economic organization known as the Comecon, the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, in 1949 by the communist countries or by the Soviet Union. It controlled East Germany, which was under the Soviet control. This helped to avoid this region of Germany from falling under capitalist sphere of influence. European history, the Warsaw Pact, 1955-1917. It maintained peace in the region, hence supplementing the efforts of the United Nations Organization UNO up to 1970. It controlled or checked the spread of America's imperialism in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe. It contributed to the decolonization of Africa. Failures of the Warsaw Pact between 1955 and 1970. It failed to win West Germany on the side of the Eastern or Communist Bloc. Up to 1970, West Germany remained a capitalist country and a full member of the North Atlantic Treaty organization NATO that had been formed by the Western powers led by USA's 1949. It failed to fully rehabilitate East Germany after World War II. As a result, this region lagged behind in terms of economic development as compared to West Germany, which registered rapid progress in economic development because of the financial assistance from the Western powers led by USA. It failed to increase its membership from the original 8 members. As a result, the Warsaw Pact had limited membership by 1970, and this undermined her ability to achieve the objectives of its founders. It failed to stop the mistrust, suspicion and tension between the Western and Eastern powers, thus leading to Cold War, which threatened international peace up to 1970. It interfered with work of the United Nations Organization (UNO) that had been set up in 1945 to maintain world peace and security. It led to instability through creating proxy wars. It led to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Questions. A. Discuss the events that led to the formation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. B. Assess the achievements of the Warsaw Pact between 1955 and 1970. The European Economic Community (EC), 1957-1970. The European Economic Community (EC), also called the European Common Market, was a regional organization or association of European countries that was set up to promote economic integration. European history. The Warsaw Pact, 1955-1917. War Roman II, which had started with the establishment of the European Coal and Steel Community (EX) in 1952. Objectives of the European Economic Community (EC). The major objectives behind the formation of the European Economic Community (EC) included the following: to create a single common market among the Western European nations, to promote peace and liberty among the European people, to build a political union of the states of Western Europe, to uplift the socio-economic conditions among the member states, to economically resist the spread of communism in Europe. Achievements of the European Economic Community (EC). The European Economic Community promoted trade among the member countries. The members of the European Economic Community (EC) abolished all tariffs affecting trade among themselves. They also set up a common tariff on goods imported from other countries into any community member. This therefore encouraged smooth trade relations among the Western European nations, which was an incredible achievement. For example, between 1960 and 1961, trade increased in the region by 29%. This therefore boosted economic development in the region. The European Economic Community (EC) increased productivity in the region. This was due to the expansion of the market. The European Economic Community (EC) brought together 6 Western European nations with total population of about 170 million people by then. This therefore created a large market that stimulated the production of both industrial and agricultural goods in the region, which was another incredible achievement of the community. The European Economic Community (EC) influenced the establishment of common price levels for the agricultural products by 1962, which was another important achievement of the community. The European Economic Community (EC) was composed of leading agricultural nations in Europe like Netherlands and France, and therefore the community embraced agriculture as one of its pillars for the development of the region. As a result, in 1962 the community set up common prices for agricultural products like wheat. This helped to protect the farmers in the region from exploitation, thus improving the agricultural sector. Similarly, the European Economic Community (EC) established a Common Agriculture Policy (CAP) for the region to support agricultural programs among the member states. The CAP set up a free market system for agricultural products inside the European Economic Community (EC) and also established protectionist policies that reduced competition from the agricultural products of other countries outside the community. This enabled the European farmers to earn sufficient revenue from their products, which was a major achievement of the community. European history. The Warsaw Pact, 1955-1917. Stockholm Convention that was signed on 4th January 1960 in the Swedish capital by the above 7 countries. This further promoted economic integration in Europe. The European Economic Community (EC) helped to increase the economic welfare of the citizens of its members. Since the late 1950s up to 1970, the European Economic Community (EC) member states like France, Belgium, West Germany and Luxembourg experienced rapid economic growth, characterized by industrial and agricultural expansion. This resulted into more employment opportunities in the region, which increased the per capita income per person. This therefore contributed to the improved standards of living among the citizens of the member states. The European Economic Community (EC), which was a major achievement up to 1970. The European Economic Community (EEC) promoted democracy in Europe. The European countries that were undemocratic were forced to carry out political reforms as a requirement to gain membership to the European Economic Community (EEC), which was made up of democratic nations. For example, in 1962 Spain requested to join the European Economic Community (EEC). However, because Spain under General Franco was not a democratic country, all the member states rejected this request in 1964. This forced the Spain and other undemocratic countries of Europe like Portugal and Greece to embark on the democratic process as a step to gain access to the European Economic Community. The European Economic Community (EEC) encouraged the free movement of persons, labour, capital and services among the member states. This therefore enabled people from one member state to live and work in other member countries. For example, many Italians went to West Germany, where they secured employment opportunities. Similarly, in the sports field there was free movement of talented players from one member state to go and play in other member countries. The European Economic Community (EEC) went ahead to protect the rights of the workers of the member states who took jobs in the member states. All this brought about economic development in the region. The European Economic Community (EEC) passed regulations which tried to harmonize safety standards in the region. As a result, there were common safety standards for things like food, transport, trade and agriculture through labeling and packaging. For example, the community introduced the CE marking standards for compliance among all the member states. Their CE was a certification mark that indicated compliance with health, safety and environmental protection standards of the products sold within the European Economic Community area. It was therefore a manufacturer's declaration that the product met the required standards and hence was fit for consumption in the region. The European Economic Community (EEC) successfully merged its governing bodies into the European committees by 1970. In 1965, the member countries of the European Economic Community (EEC) signed a treaty in Brussels, Belgium, so as to bring together the governing institutions of the European Economic Community (EEC), the European Coal and Steel Community, ECC, and the European Atomic Energy Community Euratom. The ECC had been set up in 1952 by the Western European countries to exploit iron, steel and coal in Europe, while the Euratom had been formed in 1957 by the same Treaty of Rome that established the European history, the Warsaw Pact, 1955-1970. Ministers, the Advisory, the European Parliament, and the Judicial, the Court of Justice. This merger therefore strengthened the European Economic Community (EEC). The European Economic Community (EEC) resisted the spread of communism from the Soviet Union, Russia to the rest of Europe. The community was set up during the time of the Cold War between the Western powers led by USA and the Eastern powers led by the Soviet Union, Russia. During this Cold War era, Russia was determined to extend her ideology of communism to the rest of Europe, including Western Europe, so as to expand her geographical sphere of influence. Formation of the European Economic Community (EEC) in 1957, however, created a single trading bloc in Western Europe. This therefore economically and politically strengthened the region, thus enabling it to resist the spread of communism from Russia up to 1970, which was one of the major objectives behind the formation of the community in 1957. The European Economic Community (EEC) promoted unity among the member states. That community was set up in 1957 to promote European economic unity into a single common market, and later bring about political unity in the region by bringing together 6 Western European nations that included France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg. The European Economic Community (EEC) therefore succeeded in achieving this objective of promoting unity in the region by 1970, especially in the economic field. The European Economic Community (EEC) promoted reconciliation among the Western European nations after World War II. Politically, the European Economic Community (EEC) aims at reducing tensions in the region in the aftermath of World War II. In particular, it was hoped that the integration of Western Europe would promote a lasting reconciliation of France and Germany, thereby reducing the potential for war in the post-World War II period. Indeed, when West Germany became one of the founding members of the European Economic Community (EEC), this assisted her to reconcile with the countries it had fought with during World War II, especially France. The community also promoted reconciliation between France and the members of NATO, who were in the European Economic Community (EEC) like Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands and Luxembourg for some time. This therefore helped to create stability in the region. The community also facilitated the reconstruction of Europe after World War II, which was another incredible achievement. World War II had caused massive destruction of infrastructures like roads, railway systems and industries among others in Europe, thus posing a challenge of recovery in the post-war period. In order to deal with this challenge, the European Economic Community (EC) set up the European Investment Bank in 1968, which provided capital to the member states to reconstruct their economies. For example, such money was used to reconstruct roads, railways and industries that had been destroyed during the war, thus bringing about rapid economic recovery in Western Europe. Failures of the European Economic Community (EC). Despite above achievements, the European Economic Community (EC) registered a number of failures by 1970, which included the following. The Common Agricultural Policy (CAP) failed in some areas of Western Europe. This was a policy that had been put in place by the European Economic Community (EC) member states to establish a European history. The Warsaw Pact, 1955-1917, were set by the European Economic Community. This was a major failure on the part of the European Economic Community. It failed to regulate the productivity levels, thus resulting into overproduction in the region. 1. The European Economic Community (EC) widened the market. This increased the production of both the industrial and agricultural goods, which soon exceeded the demand in the region. This eventually resulted into surpluses of products like meat, milk, butter and wines. This led to losses that partly undermined economic development in the region. The European Economic Community (EC) failed to achieve political unity in the region by 1970. Besides fostering economic unity, the European Economic Community was set up in 1957 to build a political union of the states of Western Europe. Unfortunately, due to the fear by the member countries to lose their sovereignty and independence powers, the community was unable to bring about this political unity in the region by 1970. For example, the European Parliament was a mere debating forum rather than a strong political institution to unite the member states into a political union. The European Economic Community (EC) also failed to resolve differences among the member states by 1970. Major differences existed among the member states which undermined their efforts to bring about economic and political cooperation. For example, France was acting alone in defense matters. Similarly, there was economic rivalry in the region which made France to reject the cheap imports of wine from Italy. This therefore undermined the progress of economic integration in the region. The community also failed to accept the membership of some Western European countries by 1970. Although the European Economic Community (EC) was meant to include all the countries of Western Europe as a step to economically and politically integrate the region, this was not the case, as many other Western European nations were unable to join this organization. As a result, the community was limited to the original founding members by 1970, yet these were few. For example, in 1961 Britain applied to join the European Economic Community, but her application was rejected by member countries like France because of her strong military and financial ties with the USA, which would bring the American dominance in the region. Even the membership application of other countries like Denmark, Ireland and Norway was suspended. The absence of such countries in the community partly weakened it by 1970. The European Economic Community (EC) failed to stop the withdrawal of some member states, and this greatly undermined its operations. Because of the disagreements among the member states over issues like infringement of sovereignty and financing of the Common Agricultural Policy (CAP), it became inevitable for some of the founding members to withdraw their membership from the community. For example, in 1967 the French temporarily withdrew their membership from the organization, which was a major setback. The European Economic Community (EC) failed to stop economic sabotage by the United States of America USA. When the community was formed, the United States of America USA became its chief trade partner, where the member countries imported and exported more goods than any other country in the world. Given the economic strength of the USA, this gave her the chance to sabotage European history. The Warsaw Pact, 1955-1917. The European Economic Community (EC) failed to stop completely the presence of communist activities in Western Europe, yet this was one of the major aims behind its formation in 1957. The community was formed by the capitalist countries of Western Europe, and therefore it was strongly against the spread of Russian communism to the region. Despite this, however, communist activities existed in some member countries of the community like France, Italy and West Germany, where communist political parties were set up, and these spread communist ideas in the region. Questions. A. Assess the achievements of the European Economic Community (EC) between 1957 and 1970.